All right. Hello, everyone on Facebook. This is another episode of What's the Tea? This is our weekly show we do every single Tuesday at 2 p.m. And today we're lucky to have a new guest with us here. And we have Caitlin from the Center on Halsted. So, hey, Caitlin, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk with y'all today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, one of my coworkers had actually sent me a PowerPoint from one of the trainings that the Center on Halsted had with teen dating violence and some of the information about same-sex couples and LGBTQ dating violence as well. So that's kind of how Center on Halsted was brought to my attention because I know you all are in the city. So I think it would be awesome if you could just introduce the Center on Halsted and some of the services that you provide there.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to share who I am again, my name is Caitlin, last name Tupper. The pronouns that I use are she, her. I'm the director of the Anti-Violence Project here at Center. So for folks who are not familiar, Center on Halsted is a really big LGBTQ community center here in the heart of Lakeview. So we offer just a variety of different programs, whether it's for youth or seniors, HIV, a culinary program, behavioral health counseling, and then HIV services. But what I'm here to talk about is the Anti-Violence Project, which I lead, and we provide no-cost services to LGBTQ and allied survivors of violence. And we define violence as domestic violence, sexual violence, hate crimes, discrimination, stalking, and harassment. So some of our services include counseling services, advocacy, case management, and then linkage to referrals and resources. So we really want to equip survivors with the tools to be able to thrive. And then as you just mentioned, we also have our LGBTQ Training and Public Education Institute. So trying to go out there and be able to create more LGBTQ affirming spaces with social service providers, or just raise awareness about what this looks like for the LGBTQ community and try to connect with other folks so they know that there is support out there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And just taking a look at the your website, you have so many programs as you were mentioning, and it's a big project, a big organization. So really glad to have you on here to talk more about that. Um, and I had read on there that the Center Halsted goes back to 2007, but it actually has a long history that dates back to the 70s, I believe. Um,
Mhm.
and one of the things we were discussed was talking about Pride Month in general, because of course we know it's June right now, which is Pride Month. So um, can you talk a little bit about, you don't have to talk about the history on the side on Halsted necessarily, but just about Pride Month in general, the origin or the history, as we had talked about before.
Yeah. So it's a really, really special time for us. I always like to say, too, I celebrate Pride 365 days a year as a queer person. But June is particularly important to our queer history because back in the 60s, we saw a lot of civil rights movements and mobilization, and there were a ton of riots around LGBTQ rights. But the one that's most well known is the Stonewall riots. And when that occurred was June 28th of 1969 in New York, at a club that was for LGBTQ folks called the Stonewall Inn. And it had been essentially invaded multiple times by the New York police. And there was one instance where the folks who were in that club fought back because their rights were being violated. At the time, there were a lot of laws against folks being able to have same gender relationships. There was a lot of restrictions on how folks could even express their gender. So if someone seemed that they were assigned female at birth and they were wearing male masculine clothing, then they were harassed by police at the time. So there was a ton of community support for these riots and being able to assert ourselves essentially against injustice. And a year later, that was the first LGBTQ Pride Parade. So it occurred in that neighborhood where folks were able to reclaim that day on June 28th and say, this is a time where we're going to stand up, we're going to be proud of who we are, and we honor that tradition. So we have the Pride Parade usually every year. This year it's moved to October. But it's a really, really wonderful time for community to come together to honor our elders, specifically Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who were two trans women of color who are really integral to Stonewall and to the movement. And also just being able to have this time for fun and for laughter and for connection. I think that's so crucial too.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone, we all know it's been a rough year and a half or so, kind of worldwide. So I'm definitely all about the celebration as well.
Yeah.
Um, so that, it sounds like a long time, but it's really not that long ago where this origin had kind of happened.
Right, right. And then from center, we started with Horizons, like you said, in the 70s. So shortly after, 1969, and have continued to evolve that led us to Center and Halsted today.
Well, that's really great. And that's of course we want to know more and have you on, of course. So I would kind of like to maybe do a transition. Now we've got the history, and I want to kind of circle back on that maybe towards the end.
Sure.
But one of one of the central things also you were talking about with the anti-violence project is um, how can you help someone in this community who is facing some kind of dating violence, intimate partner violence, or just and really it could just be a hatred type of violence as well. So maybe we'll start with intimate partner violence because that's where we come from, South Suburban Family
Yeah,
Shelter.
yeah.
Um, how does how does intimate partner violence compare or differ in the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, it's a really great question because there are a lot of elements that are similar that we see the power and control with physical violence or financial abuse, emotional abuse, threats and intimidation. Um, but just the specific tactics look a little bit different because there is still so much stigma and oppression around the LGBTQ community that a big piece of what people who harm their partner can use is saying, well, if you don't do this that I want you to do, then I'll out you to your employer, or I'll call your family and I'll out you, which can really be scary for folks. And it could jeopardize their employment, their relationships with others, and just their physical safety in their communities. There can also be a lot of worry about survivors being believed. And that's something that a partner who's harming may say is, who else would believe you, or who else would want to be with you if you weren't with me? Can also be a big challenge for having law enforcement, that if law enforcement intervene, they may not really know how to assess for the dynamics of who's the survivor, who's the person who's harming, if they see two men or two women. So there just needs to be a lot of education about different ways that power and control shows up in LGBTQ relationships. Even though I've been doing this work for almost 10 years, I'm always amazed at things folks do to exert power over survivors. Can be very unique and nuanced. And it's really hard for survivors to feel like they have that place to really open up and get that support for their full selves, for being a survivor, which we know already creates a lot of guilt and shame and fear and isolation, but also this piece about their identities too, and feeling like that their identities are going to be seen and heard.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Because just general domestic violence or intimate partner violence is so complex already. Um, it's not just simply like one person is being hit physically and that's kind of that. There's, as you had mentioned, the full power and control wheel, which we kind of see that with different groups. Like we have the immigrant power and control wheel, and it, as you had mentioned, also it's unfortunate, but it is very interesting how the details will change, but that dynamic stays the same.
Yes.
Just it's the details, and it's the unfortunately, it's like the leverage that someone can find against another person and use that against them. Um, and then, in particularly, I know I'm repeating a lot of it back to you. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it's the identity, and you have to kind of have a coming out if you're seeking services, and to each new person that you come across, you have to kind of re-explain the situation. Um, and with police, I know that can um, it could be a really high pressure situation, and
Mhm.
sometimes it's act first and ask questions later.
Right, right. And that's what we see. A lot of our survivors don't want to seek any immediate emergency assistance, whether it's through calling 911 or even going to a hospital because they worry about how they're going to be treated.
Absolutely. um So as and right, and just with exactly with that point, um, so maybe you work for a hospital or you work in some capacity where you're an advocate or you're providing a service. So in particular, is there anything important that you think service providers should be aware of?
Yeah, I'm always an advocate for learning. I think I'm a social worker, so I believe in lifelong learning. I feel like the more I learn, the less I know. So just encourage folks to seek out education, to continue your cultural humility and learning out what are the best ways to support folks. Some of the simplest ways is just to introduce yourself with your pronouns, because that can let folks know that you are going to be a safe person for them to share their pronouns with too, or asking folks what name they use and what pronouns they use and honoring those. Can also be just creating a space that feels inclusive. That can't really see it as much on Zoom, but I usually wear my pin that has the trans flag and the rainbow pride flag on it. So trying to have like little indicators there that show, yes, we will affirm you here, we will celebrate you here. And being aware of like what your paperwork looks like. Does that look like you can put someone's name that they use if it differs from their legal name? Does there have an option about someone putting what their gender is or their pronouns or their sexual identity? So just trying to have like a whole process and thinking through what would it be like if an LGBTQ survivor came through our system? What would their experience be like? And where can we try to figure out where there may be some barriers and fix those? Another piece that I usually like to think about too is like, where am I holding privilege? Because even though I'm a queer woman, I'm also white, I'm also cis. So I don't usually have to worry about accessing the restrooms and feeling harassed or people questioning my gender. Um, Even though I'm dating a man right now, I don't have to worry about telling people what I'm going to be doing on the weekends with my partner. But some people do. Some people feel like they have to still keep part of themselves compartmentalized and they can't be authentic.
Yeah, that's a lot of really good points there.
Yeah.
Um, I know we definitely try, as an organization, we try to be mindful of a lot of that stuff with the paperwork and putting like flags on some of the things that we distribute. And um, yeah, I think it all matters.
Mhm.
A lot of really good stuff there.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely, I share your curiosity and your lifelong learning. I think that's like, as soon as you stop, like, as soon as you think you know everything or you think you've got the answer, it's like that's trouble in my book.
Agreed. Agreed. Yes.
So yeah, I like that a lot. Trying to maintain that open mind, and that's something that I try to do with these interviews as well. When we have people on, and because there's, you know, you I've only got so much time and I've only got one mind, but you know, want to hear from everyone.
Absolutely. I feel like it's just such a much more rich world when we're able to get everybody's perspectives and experiences.
Absolutely. Not definitely not one person has to say in all of that.
Yeah.
So, and then so that was definitely some good advice, some good things. But we had talked a little bit about this beforehand. Do you have any concerns about um, LGBTQ people receiving proper service or just like proper respect or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. That I've had countless stories of survivors tell me about how hard it's been for them to reach out for help. And then when they actually do, feeling like they've been dismissed or invalidated or discriminated against, particularly for trans folks, like trying to reach out to shelters and being told, we don't accept you here, or folks going to the emergency room for medical injuries and then noticing that their doctor is not honoring their name or the way that they explain what their body's like. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of trans survivors of sexual violence from an intimate partner. So already they may have a complicated relationship with their bodies. And then to have that type of harm can be really, really traumatic too. And then have to go through the medical system, where the medical system is pretty binary in how they describe bodies and how they describe folks. It can be a challenge. And just having remedies for folks who are seeking justice. A lot of our survivors tell us, I don't want the person who I love to get in trouble. I just want the abuse to stop. And I want to have some other remedies so that they're not having to face legal consequences, because this could be still someone that they have a lot of care for, or are really concerned about what that impact is going to be going through the criminal justice system too. Um, and again, just a lot of survivors want to know that they can find a place that is going to feel safe, that is going to feel affirming for them, that can be really healing, that can be really reparative for them in recovering from the violence that they've experienced.
I think that's a really interesting point, what you had said, about just wanting the violence to stop, just not necessarily getting a whole, you know, referral program going where
Right.
we're seeking all these different things, but just a very simple request, and how that can get complicated.
Mhm. Can.
So in the anti-violence project, and maybe even just the Center at Halsted at large, um, are there other similar themes as to when you're helping people, what kind of what they're saying and what they're asking for? Do you see any themes, any other themes like that?
Yeah, I mean, we always want to be survivor centered. So we don't have an agenda. We're not here to pressure anybody. We're here just to educate them on their rights and their options and let them kind of lead the way, because they've already experienced so much powerlessness and feeling like someone has controlled them. It can be so empowering for them to feel like they have their voice and their choice back. So, really, just trying to honor that too. And one piece that we've really been trying to uplift and speak on in the anti-violence project is how Black trans women have been disproportionately impacted by violence, oftentimes by an intimate partner or someone who they've had a dating or sexual relationship with, or even family members too. So just being able to say their names and share their stories so that they're still remembered as well.
And I think our organization shares that with ours. Like, for example, you can just simply call the hotline phone number that we
Yeah.
have, and it's not like we have to just like set you up for an appointment for counseling right away. It's like if you just want to kind of get a feel out there and see what you think about the person answering the phone. Does it seem like they're listening? Does it seem like they're understanding what you're asking? So that's a really good point, especially when you're trying to flee from violence, because you don't know exactly if you're going to get into a worse situation if by bringing one more person into it. So um, I definitely resonate with that. We want to um, make things more simple.
Mhm, exactly. Yeah, we've definitely had that too, of folks calling in a couple times for safety planning and just for crisis support. And then we'll hear from them months later and say, "Hey, I am ready for therapy," or "I was able to flee this relationship and now I'm physically safe. Can I get some support for my emotional safety now?" So absolutely, that sometimes we're the first person that survivors have ever disclosed this to. So we really just want to appreciate the courage and bravery that it takes to reach out.
Absolutely. And with your with your groups or individual therapy and counseling, are you doing that online right now, or is it a mixture of both with in person?
So right now it's still in line. We are exploring what that's going to look like with in person. Our staff is vaccinated, so we're just kind of figuring out the logistics of the space and what that's going to look like for bringing folks back. But we do have a lot of folks who are interested in coming back to in-person services, that they're zoomed out, or it's not safe for them to engage in services at home, or they just really miss that face-to-face connection. And it's really nice just to be able to sit across from somebody and to be able to have that type of relationship too.
Yeah, absolutely. All the above on our end as well. Um, I know we are doing at least we have been doing in person counseling and things like that, but
Yeah.
I think we can all relate to missing that in person connection, even though there is benefits. Like, we could very easily hop on the phone call and distribute this out to Facebook, and it's very it scales really well. We could reach a lot of people, so that's always nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we do have a lot of folks that are calling us from way out in the suburbs. So transportation here would be so stressful, or folks who have chronic health concerns. And it's really a challenge for them to get out of the house or to stay out of the house for a long period of time. So being able to have the option of telehealth has been great for a lot of folks too, to have that accessibility.
Yeah. And I wonder prior if how if the pandemic had not happened, how much of that would be in place. So um, I think, yeah, at least I'm optimistic about like the future of services that way. Now that we kind of have, we can went to the past, and now we're somewhat, we're moving back in. I think I saw Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, announced that um, we're one of the largest cities, or we're the largest city in the U.S. to kind of more or less reopen.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you. I hope that we can take the learning lessons and move it forward and still think of other ways to innovate.
Absolutely. So trying to see, we talked about so much, and there's so many good things here. One thing I did want to talk about, we kind of mentioned it in the beginning, was this idea of like celebration or success stories. Do you have any that kind of jump to mind for you?
Yeah, I think what I like to think of is we hear a lot about vicarious trauma, and I took a training a few years ago where we talked about vicarious resilience, and I feel like that is something that I've definitely learned from my clients too. Is I've really been inspired by their resiliency and ability to just to adapt and to heal. Um, so a big thing that comes up for our clients is that they just feel more like themselves. They feel confident. They feel like they're able to make decisions. They feel like they know where they want to go with their lives or making progress towards their goals. Because sometimes the first time that we talk with them, they're still living in a lot of terror and anxiety, and just a lot of worry and a lot of guilt. So being able to give them some education and some tools about what domestic violence looks like and assuring them it's not their fault, being able to show them the power and control wheel can be so eye-opening for a lot of folks too, to recognize they're not alone in their experiences. Um, and then being able to equip them with some coping skills and tools so that they feel like they can go out into the world and thrive, not just survive.
Yeah, I think just having that other person just being like, no, you are on, I do understand what you're talking about, and just confirming and validating what they're saying, and um, having a second person, I think that's really helpful.
Mhm.
So was there anything that we didn't discuss or cover so far that you had wanted to mention?
Just want to encourage folks, to, if they're interested in getting involved with Center and Halsted, whether it's volunteering or coming to some of our events, I think that's a great way to learn how to be an ally too, is just coming to some events and seeing what the language is like and what the culture is like with LGBTQ folks. Trying to check us out on Instagram or social media. And if folks are interested in training, we can talk about that, and just want to let folks know about how they can reach out to the Anti-Violence Project too. So I'm happy to share our phone number, email, or whatever is best way, just to let folks know that, again, they're not alone and that there are resources available for them.
Absolutely, and I'll make sure we, at least in the comments, get some links posted, so it's just right under the video for everyone.
Great.
Um, Other than that, if you heard some noise, my cat was bugging me. So I didn't want to stop the conversation in the middle of it and mention it, but if you hear some cat meows, it was on my side. I
No,
apologize.
I couldn't hear it, but I can relate. I have 3 cats at home and they're all very rambunctious. So, yep.
Mine was ignoring me all day until, of course, I'm recording something.
Right. The focus is not on them. And they're like, how dare you?
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and speaking with me and with everyone on Facebook. So thank you very much, Caitlin.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thanks to everyone listening on Facebook. We'll be back again next week, same time and place, and we'll have some different tea for you all.